Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Conduition. For those who I might not have met yet, I've been working on various post-quantum initiatives. I'm recently just joined Brink a few months ago, and I'm already really enjoying the resources that you guys have access to and getting to meet all you nice folks. And I just attended the Bitcoin Plus Plus conference in Toronto, and it prompted me to think about how the different post-quantum initiatives that me and other colleagues have been working on interface and interact with each other and with other projects outside of the quantum realm. And so I wanted to make this presentation in order to help people understand how these different projects fit together and how they interface with your project potentially, and to give you a forum to ask questions uh, in that capacity. I feel like quantum in Bitcoin is a very overhyped topic, and people hyper focus on like one or two specific things, and they forget to look at the big picture sometimes, and often that can lead to like an information saturation effect, where people just are like, oh my god, this is just way too much noise. I need to tune this out so I can focus on what I'm doing. Um, and I think that kind of uh, it would be a good opportunity now for people to look at the different projects and see um, how they interact in a more abstract sense rather than tuning into the specific arguments of each project. And so we're not going to get into too many technicals today. We're going to focus specifically on interactions. And in some ways, we are going to talk about some technicals, but they're going to be only at the very high level. In that, for example, how does P2MR interact with pay to taproot V2? How does tripwire affect rescue protocols, and so on? And we can leave discussion about specific technical stuff for other presentations. So I'm going to start off with the thing that most people think about when they think about the post-quantum transition, and that is the post-quantum output types discussion. So I'm just going to zoom in right here and have a look. There are a bunch of different proposals for post-quantum output types. And perhaps I should start with contextualizing why these are even necessary. We currently have a set of output types in Bitcoin that offer us different scripting and spending capabilities, but none of them offer post-quantum safe ways to spend coins. Although you could argue that QSB, quantum safe Bitcoin, is a way to, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But by and large, none of them offer any kind of quantum resistance. Specifically, the most modern one, pay to taproot, is quantum unsafe in that it posts a bare elliptic curve public key on chain. And a quantum computer of sufficient power can factor the discrete log out of that key and then use the key spend path of taproot to steal coins. And so, in order to allow people to spend their bitcoins without disabling or confiscating coins, we need to introduce a new output type. There's a bunch of different candidates for that. The most commonly known one is P2MR, pay to Merkle root. And this is essentially just taproot, but with the key spend path taken out. So instead of posting an elliptic curve public key on chain, you're posting a Merkle root. The Merkle root is the root of a arbitrarily structured Merkle tree where the leaves are scripts, exactly like Taproot's script tree, except just without the elliptic curve key tweaking aspect. And this has been worked on for a few years. It's currently under the moniker BIP 360. This proposal has been authored originally by Hunter Beast, Ethan Haleman, and Isabel Fox and Duke, and now is being iterated on and maintained by several new contributors like Jeff Bride and Not Mike. There's also a alternative proposal that has been surfaced more recently called pay to taproot V2. And this is a straight up clone of taproot, where instead of explicitly disallowing the quantum vulnerable part, which is the key spend path, instead, pay to taproot V2 would enact a sort of social contract where users must have a post-quantum secure fallback way of spending their coins, under the assumption that in the future, the key spend path will be disabled by a soft fork, triggered by means which we'll talk about in a bit. Pay to taproot V2 is especially interesting because it actually dovetails very well with the CISA cross-input signature aggregation proposal that Fabian's been working on, in that it's the same format of output. It's a bare public key posted on chain, and you can spend it with a key spend. You can spend it potentially using CISA, and it could potentially, that output type proposed by CISA could potentially be the same output type used by Pay to Taproot v2. Now, there's no BIP for this yet. That's still forthcoming, but it's being talked about quite a bit on the mailing lists and on Delving. Peter Vulla is the most notable advocate for this particular design. There is a third, which I should mention, called Pay to Taproot hash. I don't know anybody who is actively working on this other than Boris Nagayev, who is, I could say, the originator of the idea that allows Pay to Taproot hash, although I think AJ Towns was the one who first proposed it on Delving as an explicit output type. This one depends on some internal mechanics of how elliptic curve signatures can be used to recover public keys. It is essentially Taproot, but the public key is hidden behind a hash in such a way that you can recover the public key from a signature. Now, the trade-offs between these three different output types are as follows. Pay-to-Merkle-Root is by far the most quantum secure, but it is also the least efficient. It requires posting, I believe under current knowledge, about 96 bytes per witness, per input witness, in order to spend with an elliptic curve signature. Pay to Taproot hash and Pay to Taproot v2 both require 64 bytes per input, which is just one elliptic curve signature. Pay to Taproot v2, however, is not explicitly quantum secure. Pay to Taproot hash is quantum secure until you spend coins. By spending coins using the key spend path, you reveal an elliptic curve public key, and that public key can be factored by a quantum computer. So in other words, Pay to Taproot hash is secure at rest, but not in transit. Pay to Taproot v2 is insecure at all times until its key spend path is disabled, and P2MR is secure at all times as long as you never expose an elliptic curve key to a quantum adversary. All right, I'm going to zoom out now, and we're going to see that these proposals actually depend on some other stuff. And first, we should focus on Pay to Taproot v2, because I think this is the most interesting case. Pay to Taproot v2, and to an extent, Pay to Taproot hash as well, both depend on being able to disable the vulnerable key spend path. In order to do that, you need to know when a quantum computer exists. You need some sort of on-chain oracle to know when a sufficiently advanced quantum computer is capable of breaking SecP256K1 keys. And this brings us to the topic of tripwire and canaries. So quantum canaries are exactly what I was just describing. They are an oracle to tell you when quantum computers have arrived. Now, you could say that the oracle is just a sufficient quantity of hash power. This would just be activating it by a community-endorsed soft fork. That's one way of doing a canary. There are also explicit, provable ways of showing that a quantum computer exists, such as by requiring a proof of spending a nums point. A nothing up my sleeve point, for those not familiar, is an elliptic curve point produced via a hash function. If you can hash a specific preimage onto the elliptic curve and then show that you know its discrete log, then you can show that you have broken the elliptic curve discrete log problem, because that's basically what it is. The elliptic curve discrete log problem asks you, if you're given an elliptic curve point, find its discrete log, and that's exactly what spending a nums point would do. There are also, for example, ways that you could do this with user-assisted soft forks or other kinds of mechanisms. But these are the main systems that we have been talking about on the mailing list. And a lot of things depend on these systems being robust and on timing Q-Day correctly. For example, if we did not activate a tripwire canary in time, then Pay to Taproot v2 would be vulnerable to quantum computers. And this is one of the major downsides of Pay to Taproot v2. Pay to Merkle-Root, on the other hand, does not explicitly require disabling the elliptic curve key spend path. However, it still benefits from doing so. So I should really have another arrow drawing between P2MR and canaries. Uh, and there are lots of other things that also depend on canaries, such as the issue of Satoshi's coins, which is a very commonly known controversial topic. Satoshi's coins, for those not familiar, uh, I think they total around 1.8 or 2 million Bitcoins. They're a substantial portion of the supply, and they currently have no known way of rescuing them from a quantum computer. There's different options to do. There is the freeze option, where we deploy a soft fork that just disables Satoshi's coins and confiscates them. I think most people are not a big fan of that. There's the do nothing option. The do nothing option is akin to not pulling the lever on the trolley problem. If you do nothing, eventually the coins will be stolen by a quantum computer if one is ever built. The third option is Hourglass. Hourglass is a proposal that suggests we rate limit Satoshi's coins, allowing them to be spent, but only up to a certain fixed amount per block. And this way, Satoshi could still, rescue his coins if he's alive, and if quantum computers don't appear, Satoshi could still, use and spend his coins. But if quantum computers do appear before Satoshi does, then they would try to steal his coins, and they would succeed for a while. But the interesting thing about Hourglass is that after a while, more quantum computers may appear to try to steal the coins. And so they will start a fee rate bidding war with each other, trying to bribe miners to get their particular spends included in a block. And there's some interesting discussions to be had there, because it allows us to potentially alleviate the security budget problem, where, over time, the block subsidy is decreasing to a point where miners might not be incentivized to mine so much anymore. And Hourglass might help to mitigate that, because it essentially subsidizes the miners using Satoshi's coins caused by a fee rate bidding war. Lots of interesting stuff going on there, but I'm going to move on now and talk about rescue protocols really quick. I said earlier that there's no known way to rescue Satoshi's coins. Well, this is what I mean by rescue. There are ways to save coins that have not moved to post-quantum addresses after Q-Day. For example, if I were to just be a regular old Bitcoiner, not really reading the news or Twitter, and if I were to just sit on my laurels and wait until Q-Day, and then I come online and I notice, oh, quantum computers exist now. Why can't I spend my coins? It's because maybe we deployed a rescue protocol. A rescue protocol is a way to show that the authentic owner of a certain UTXO knows something that a quantum computer doesn't, and use that to allow them to spend their coins. For example, Taj Dryja's lifeboat proposal allows us to do this using hashed addresses. If you have your Bitcoins held in a hashed address, that address has a preimage that only you know, hopefully, and which a quantum computer would not. And you can use that knowledge asymmetry to prove that you own those coins and not a quantum computer, using something called a commit reveal protocol. There's also other commit reveal protocols like Lifted Foxcoin and my own proposal, Dropkick. And these are all ways of just proving that you know some secret piece of information that a quantum computer doesn't, by posting a commitment in a block that's hidden, and then revealing your commitment later to show that you knew a particular piece of information first, chronologically before a quantum computer. But more generally, any rescue protocol just allows you to use a knowledge asymmetry to prove that you own a coin. And you can also do this with zero knowledge proofs, although these are a little more complicated to deploy on chain and a little less performant. There's been a lot more work done on ZK snarks and starks for rescue protocols than there have been for commit reveal. I'm personally much more interested in commit reveal, but ZK starks are also a potential interesting feature or a potential interesting technology that could be used as part of commit reveal. So these actually should be kind of connected with the dotted line here. Now, in order to deploy a rescue protocol, you need to know when Q-Day happens. And so in order to make a rescue protocol work, we have to depend on canary tripwire. And of course, if you're trying to rescue coins, it means you need a quantum secure way to spend those coins. So we can see commit reveal and ZK Stark based rescue protocols also depend on having post quantum signatures. So let's move over there now. And this is where we get into a particularly interesting zoo. The post quantum signatures world is extremely complicated with many, many different trade offs available. And so it stands to reason that this is, of course, the most complicated part of the map. There's many different competing proposals, of which I'm working on one, Shrinks. Shrinks is a hash-based signature algorithm. Hash-based signature algorithms are well known for their being very conservative in their cryptographic assumptions. But there are also others. People are working on lattice-based cryptography and isogeny-based cryptography. I'm more gently researching isogenies. It's not one of my it's not my primary focus at the moment. But there are also others like Nadav Cohen who are working more full time on isogenies. There's also quantum safe Bitcoin, which is a proposal that uses existing technologies on Bitcoin in order to spend coins in a quantum safe way. But it relies on a lot of grinding work to the point where you need to pay like $60 in cloud computing costs just to spend a single UTXO. So while I wanted to put it here to mention it, I don't think it's really worth evaluating as a long-term option. Lid Bitcoin PQC is a project, an implementation being worked on by Hunter Beast that includes a number of different post-quantum signature schemes. You can also construct post-quantum signature schemes out of Bitcoin script. If you had something like OpCat or the Great Script Restoration, these would be significantly more complicated, but still feasible to use, more expensive, but an option if one of these were to already be deployed would be to say, roll your own Winternitz signature code in Bitcoin script and then provide a signature in the witness to match that. Although I think in the long term, what we really want is a dedicated signature scheme, like say Shrinks, which is deployed with its own specific opcode and its own specific validation rules. And that way it can be standardized across the entire network instead of having roll your own crypto type affair. There are a number of technologies in the orbit of post-quantum signatures, which we should also talk about. For example, there's been some work on multi-party computation-based signing for hash-based signatures being done as part of the Shrinks working group. This would be a way of constructing a multi-signature key in the same way that we can use MuSig for elliptic curve signatures and Schnorr signatures today. This does require a lot more computational work and some additional security assumptions, though. Another more recently published work is Prawns, which is a threshold-based signing scheme for Shrinks that's being developed at localhost research. We can also consider how to aggregate signatures, similar to how CISA aggregates elliptic curve signatures. And using snarks, for example, one could do this by taking a big batch of signatures and proving over a binary or arithmetic circuit that you know all of the valid signatures for these particular messages and these particular public keys. But this is a more long-term effort, I think, and it will require more developments in the field of snarks to become viable in the long term. Although it's very interesting, the Ethereum Foundation is also working on this, and so we may stand to benefit from some of their research in this field. And then there is the Great Script Restoration VAROPS budget. And this can be useful for accounting for the larger computational cost of post-quantum signatures. And we're particularly interested in this for Shrinks because Shrink signatures have different computational costs depending on the size of the signature. Smaller signatures cost less than larger signatures. And so executing a check sig operation on a large signature should cost more than executing it on a small signature. And the existing SIGOPS budget does not really account for this. And so we're looking at ways to integrate GSR's VAROps budget into our shrink's proposal for this. All right, I'm going to zoom back out again. And if we look back at the post-quantum output types discussion, we can see that it connects over here to the these elliptic curve optimizations that I mentioned earlier. And I did hint at some of these, such as CISA being useful for pay-to-taproot v2, and elliptic curve key recovery being useful for pay-to-taproot hash. It's also useful for pay-to-Merkle root. But more generally, the reason why I've connected these two bubbles here is to show that post-quantum output types aren't really that useful if nobody wants to use them. In order to incentivize people to migrate to post-quantum output types, we want to try to make the post-quantum output type as efficient as possible. And so we want these elliptic curve signature optimizations like CISA and elliptic curve key recovery in order to make people want to use the new, cheaper output type. And in the case of P2MR, the best case scenario that we can hope for is CISA plus P2MR, because with CISA, we get the exact same asymptotic witness size as pay-to-taproot, 64 bytes per input. But that is still not as good as if we combined CISA with pay-to-taproot v2, because then we would get all the same benefits as CISA, but also with post-quantum security, contingent, of course, on tripwire and canary working out, being able to be deployed in time before Q-Day. So, okay, that pretty much wraps up the high-level view of this map. And as part of this presentation, I want to start opening it up to questions, because this is a very complicated set of projects with a lot of different interactions and conflicts between all of the different proposals. And I am not really sure where people stand on their understanding of this. So maybe I can start opening it up to questions, and you guys can clarify what might not be so clear.
I'll go. Conduition, what was the elliptic curve key recovery that you mentioned? I might have missed what that was under ECC optimizations.
Oh, yes. So this was a development recently from Boris Nagaev. He found a way to, maybe I should back up here. In classical ECDSA and Schnorr signatures, it's possible to, if you're given a signature and a message, you can recover the public key that was used to sign that message with that signature. However, in BIP 340, the Schnorr signature format that we use with Bitcoin, this isn't possible because we include the public key as part of the challenge hash when producing a signature. You can't invert the challenge hash. And so in order to recover a key, you'd need to know the key in advance. So it doesn't really work in that context of BIP 340. And what Boris found was that if you replace the elliptic curve public key with a commitment to the public key, say, for example, the Merkle root of pay-to-Merkle root or the hash of pay-to-taproot hash, then you can still recover the public key. And this lets us save 32 bytes because you no longer need to put the public key on chain. When we realized this, then after this was discovered, the witness size of pay-to-Merkle root decreased from 128 bytes down to 96 bytes because we no longer needed to post the 32 byte public key on chain. And pay-to-taproot hash became possible because now we could post a hash of the elliptic curve public key on chain, recover the elliptic curve public key, hash it, and check it against the script pub key on chain. And this would have the same witness size as Taproot now, which is pretty cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am curious what you think about the topic. So you called it just Satoshi's keys in this case, but I mean that's not really the full story. We don't really know if they're all Satoshi's keys, and there are more coins that would probably fall into this category. But if it really, like just in theory, if it was really all Satoshi's coins, then, or if it was only about Satoshi's coins, I mean, there are other knowledge asymmetries where we could maybe protect them just for Satoshi, right? So Satoshi has a lot of writings. He has I'm not really that familiar with it, but like if it was just about Satoshi's coins, there could be probably some other knowledge asymmetries that we could leverage, right?
That's interesting. Do you mean such as, for example, Satoshi's PGP key?
Yeah, I mean, like something like that. I mean, like he has published quite a bit in the time that he was available, and like yeah, I don't really know what would be possible in that regard, but like if it was really just about Satoshi's coins, we could make like an exception for Satoshi alone, I guess, because there might be possibilities. I'm not sure if this has been discussed at all, but I think the bigger picture is that it's not only Satoshi's coins, right?
Yes, interesting idea. More generally, we tend to refer to Satoshi's coins as just pay-to-public key coins, because those are the ones that are difficult to rescue using rescue protocols. Um, Satoshi in particular is the interesting case, I think, because he might, yeah, you're right, he might have some knowledge asymmetry. The question is, what are they, and are they decidable in that can we tell which coins are Satoshi's and that can be rescued and which ones aren't? And I don't think it's possible to distinguish which ones are Satoshi's. So I don't think any knowledge asymmetries will be decidable. But I'd be very interested to hear if there are any. My concern is that there might be knowledge asymmetries. They just might not be post-quantum secure. For example, his PGP key is probably an RSA key or an ECC key. And so that will be easily broken by a quantum computer, and it wouldn't really improve the situation much. But maybe there's some other mechanism. And this would require going back into historical Bitcoin code and seeing how keys were generated back in the 2008, 2009 era, and figuring out if there is some way that those keys were generated that is unique to the owner of the coins, which a quantum computer can't forge. To my knowledge, nobody has actually spent time on this. So this would be a cool field of research for anybody interested.
I have another question, maybe. Like if we moved on to quantum safe signatures, what kind of functionality that we currently have would we be losing? I guess that the things that are really nice, stuff like music, is completely off the table. And are there some of the ideas that do some of these things, at least a little bit?
Great question. There's a number of different options here. And the main question that you want to answer first is, what family of signature scheme do you want? There's different cryptographic assumptions that we can use. The one that I'm working on primarily is shrinks, which is a hash-based signature algorithm. And what hashes gain in their cryptographic security, they lose in their cryptographic flexibility, unfortunately. The hash-based signature schemes tend not to have any kind of algebraic structure, and so they don't really permit fancy constructions like musig or frost. They also don't really have any way of aggregating signatures together other than with more general schemes like snarks. And so shrinks and other hash-based signature schemes like Sphinx, SLHDSA, and so on, these are really the worst case for our cryptographic flexibility. But they are the best case for security. Lattices and lattice cryptography are a little more flexible here. The multi-signature schemes that we know about are a lot more efficient, and they do exist. So you can actually construct like multi-signature schemes based on lattices. Although they come with the caveat that none of the existing NIST standardized signature schemes, with the potential exception of Falcon, in the case of Labrador, can admit multi-signature schemes. You have to modify the signature scheme itself in order to support multi-signature. So unlike with, for example, Schnorr signatures, where musig is just kind of like a drop-in addition, with lattice-based signature schemes, you have to rejig the signature scheme itself in order to support multi-signature. Now, the exception that I mentioned there, Falcon and Labrador. Labrador is a snark that uses lattice-based assumptions instead of, say, a hash-based snark. It uses, I believe, module SIS as its core cryptographic assumption. I'll probably be wrong there, but suffice to say, there are ways of aggregating and doing multi-signature with lattices. They're just a little more complicated than they are with elliptic curve signatures. Isogenies, with isogeny-based signature schemes, this is a little more of a wild card. There is no, as far as I know, there is no efficient way of doing multi-signature with SkiSign or Prism or any of the other like compact isogeny-based signature schemes similar to them. There are isogeny-based signature schemes that do allow for threshold signatures and multi-signature, but they're significantly less efficient than the state of the art. And so most people aren't really working on that. There is some cryptographic flexibility that we get from isogenies in that we can do BIP32 very easily. By the way, lattices can also do BIP32, but like I mentioned earlier, it requires changing the signature schemes a little. So it's dubious in security. Isogenies are a lot easier for BIP32. You can derive child keys quite easily. But of course, isogenies, I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but isogenies are the much more risky play in terms of their cryptographic security. In fact, just a few weeks ago, there was a paper published that reduced the security of the core assumptions of isogeny cryptography by a pretty significant margin, to the point where they're having to redo all their parameterizations. So it goes to show that, yeah, you can go for one of these newer, edgier crypto systems with lattices or isogenies, but you're taking a big bet that cryptanalysis will not progress that much against them in the future. Okay, sorry. Making sure I answered your question. I think I did that for all three families. There are also other post-quantum signature scheme families that I haven't shown on the graph here, and that's mostly just because nobody in the Bitcoin space that I know of is really working on them. For example, there's code-based cryptography, and there's multivariate cryptography. But these are less well-known in the Bitcoin community and less trusted, I would say, compared to these main three.
Right, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, I have more a game theoretical question about tripwire. I was wondering, isn't there a good chance that it's too late when that activates? So if some entity has a way to break the D-lock that they use to steal the coins instead of posting the proof to the blockchain? Are there any thoughts on that?
No, you're completely right. I actually failed to mention this earlier when I was talking about tripwire. The nothing up my sleeve point tripwire that I had mentioned is subject to a very big gotcha, a big catch-22, which is if you have a quantum computer and you can break Bitcoin and you can activate the tripwire, why would you do so? If you have this giant computer that you just invested a ton of money into building, why wouldn't you instead use it to steal Satoshi's coins, for example, or steal Coinbase's custody wallet and use that to recoup your investment? Why would you willingly throw away all that extra money that you could earn by attacking Bitcoin? And this is really the problem with tripwire, is that you need to assume you have a benevolent quantum computer available to activate it. If the quantum computer that first appears is not benevolent, it will instead use its quantum computer to attack Bitcoin or do other nasty stuff. Maybe it doesn't even care about Bitcoin at all. Maybe it does nothing and doesn't interact with our network at all. You have no way of knowing what the quantum computer will do. This is like an unsolvable problem, I think. And yet, so many different things in the quantum migration ecosystem depend on being able to accurately predict Q-Day. And unfortunately, this is really the best that we have right now, the best that we know of. There's different ways to activate some sort of canary or tripwire system, but none of them are really reliable. I think probably the best case scenario that we can hope for is if we deploy a canary, we hope that some benevolent company is pressured by the U.S. government or whoever government whoever's jurisdiction they're under to activate the tripwire instead of stealing. But that's a pretty weak assumption, and it's not at all something we should depend upon, in my view.
Yeah, kind of like in that same vein, when would you say we switch from saying if there's a quantum computer to like, oh yeah, it will probably happen? Like, is there some point that you personally kind of try to keep track of? Maybe a quantum computer is able to do computation for like a certain, like for like an hour or some like useful computation, or it's able to scale to some, that's kind of something that I am curious about, if there's any way to keep track of that or just kind of read papers or what. But yeah.
That's a great question. I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a quantum physicist, and I don't consider myself an expert on predicting the progress of quantum computers. I tend to trust in the words of more experienced people than myself. I prefer to focus on what I do best, which is cryptography, and I kind of leave that discussion for others. So I kind of cop out of it a little, but I'd say the best metric that we have is stable logical qubits. As the number of stable logical qubits grows, quantum computers can run more complicated computations faster. I think, and again, this number changes like every year because quantum algorithms get better. But I think currently the threshold is around like 1,000 to 2,000 qubits. If a quantum computer can maintain 1,000 to 2,000 stable logical qubits, then we are already in extreme danger territory, and they're probably going to be able to break ECC. If not today, then tomorrow. But there's also other metrics like how many gates can you compute with, and how long can you keep the qubits stable, and so on. I personally don't know enough to be able to give you a satisfactory answer here. I would say this is a do your own research type thing. My typical, my mantra is we can't predict Q-Day and we shouldn't try. We should try to build what we can to be secure against Q-Day happening at any point. It could happen a year from now. It could happen 10 years from now. And I'm basing my work off of an extremely rough estimate of it happening sometime within that gap, within that band.
Conduition, you made reference to Ethereum in terms of post-quantum snark and aggregation. I'm curious, what are other blockchains doing or investigating, and is it at all applicable to Bitcoin?
Well, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you there. I know Solana has started their efforts towards post-quantum migration. I don't know what their method is. I can tell you about Ethereum's method because I do know a little bit about that. They're planning to do stateful hash-based signatures with snark-based aggregation. So every signature could be quite large, but as long as it's efficient to verify, they'll be efficient to prove. And then the I was going to say miners, but they're actually called validators on Ethereum now. The Ethereum validators produce these proofs that all of the signatures in a block are valid, and then nodes can validate those proofs to see, yes, all these signatures were there and they were verified correctly, and that counts the block as valid. Yeah, sorry, I don't really have any other answers for you there on other blockchains. It would be an interesting survey to do to, look through all the other blockchains around and see which ones are pursuing post-quantum, which ones aren't, and for the ones that are, what methods are they tackling?
I saw a clip of an interview with Dan Bonnet, and he seemed to indicate that he was surprised that Bitcoin wasn't looking more into lattices. Did you happen to see his interview? I think it was in the last month or so. And do you know why he was sort of, I don't want to say pushing for lattices, but sort of surprised that there wasn't more work there?
I did. I think I saw that interview. Dan's point is valid in one sense, but invalid in another. The most of the world right now is migrating towards lattice-based cryptography because they give you efficient KEMs, efficient signature schemes. They admit some degree of flexibility. They're not too huge. They're pretty quick to verify. They have a pretty good middle-of-the-road performance profile. Their assumptions are decently well studied. However, And Nadav Cohen pointed this out recently, so I'm kind of parroting him when I say this, but many of the assumptions that lattice-based cryptography relies upon today are actually not old. They're quite new, apparently, such as module learning with errors. These are less well studied than the old classical learning with errors, or and Dan's point was that if the rest of the world is migrating to this, well, we are already going to depend upon this cryptography elsewhere. Like the download link that you click to install Bitcoin Core is going to be encrypted using MLKEM, most likely, which is a lattice-based crypto system. It's going to be authenticated probably using MLDSA, which is a lattice-based crypto system. If you can't depend on lattices, then his point is basically, well, why not use them in Bitcoin as well? You're going to benefit from the rest of the ecosystem support and cryptanalysis that the entire rest of the world is focusing on. And to an extent, yes, that's true. However, in that same interview, Dan suggested using Hawk, which is a crypto system that was just recently broken, as in like a week or two ago. I shouldn't say broken. It was weakened significantly by AI-assisted cryptanalysis from Anthropic. And it reduced the security of the crypto system such that it was no longer viable in the NIST post-quantum crypto computation. And these kind of sudden breaks can be handled in the Web 2.0 world, where if you have, say, a crypto system that's suddenly a lot less secure, well, you have a few months for your TLS certificates to expire. And after they've expired, those certificates can no longer be used. You have to rotate them. And when you rotate them, you can just switch to a different signature scheme. Not so easy with Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, when you create a UTXO, that UTXO is presumed valid forever. It does not expire. And we want people to be able to have UTXOs that don't expire forever. And unfortunately, if you have to update your cryptography every year or two, you'd need to have some sort of like rotating crypto agility system baked into Bitcoin. And the only way to do that is if you have like a more secure, weaker assumption scheme as a fallback. And this is exactly why we're suggesting hash-based signatures in the Shrinks working group. We're focused so much on this because having an extremely conservative signature scheme that you can rely upon in your back pocket allows you to do stuff like lattices safely and still be able to move UTXOs over to different signature schemes later using this more secure fallback. And this is the like long-term vision that I personally have for Bitcoin, where we'll have like a hash-based signature scheme that we deployed years ago that's pretty robust and secure and very conservative, even if it's not so efficient. And then we can use more efficient schemes like lattices or isogenies once they've matured a bit more, once we have efficient multi-signature schemes and threshold schemes and signature aggregation and that sort of thing. And if they break, which is possible, we can fall back to the hash-based scheme. But yeah, I think that is mostly why I'm not so interested in lattices today. Not to say that I'm never going to be interested in lattices. I think a lot of people are and should be, but I see it as more of like a long-term, like 10, 15, 20-year project. Whereas I think hash-based signatures are something we need to work on today.
You mentioned in your explanation there that there's benefits in using technology that the rest of the world outside of blockchains are using, which obviously is a little bit at odds since Bitcoin has its own sort of separate needs for its signature schemes and crypto systems, which leads me to be curious, how do we know something like Shrinks is secure? Like, what, we're sort of, I don't want to say rolling our own, but sort of coming up with our own schemes here to some degree. Like, how do we get assurances that this is legitimate?
Great point. Well, actually, Shrinks is technically roll your own in a way, but really Shrinks is just an amalgamation of two different standardized signature schemes. One is called SLHDSA, more commonly known as Sphinx, and the other is XMSS, or particularly a customized variant of XMSS that's made to fit Bitcoin's use cases a bit more. And the way that we know that they're secure is using formal pen and paper proofs and formal verification of code. And this is actually just something that that Jonas and Remix posted recently. They were working on a formally verified implementation of shrinks, where they use things like VSS and ROC to prove the cryptographic behavior of the implementation is correct and sound. And this assists, or it supplements, the formal pen and paper proof that Mikhail Kudinov is working on, which would show that Shrinks is EUF CMA secure under these assumptions. And it matches more or less the security proof of SLH-DSA, Sphinx, and of the XMSS scheme that came before Shrinks. By the way, I should mention the cryptographic assumptions that we rely on in Shrinks are actually weaker than the assumptions that we rely on for Bitcoin's consensus algorithms. In Bitcoin, we require collision resistance of the SHA-256 hash function. We do not require that for Shrinks. So in a way, you can actually say that Shrinks is more secure than Bitcoin itself. Although I don't want to jump to making that claim because they're completely different systems. So they don't really correspond in an apples to apples way. But the cryptographic assumptions of Shrinks are weaker than those of Bitcoin itself. That's the more accurate way of saying it.
I would have another question. It seems to me that yes, there are these canaries and something that would determine that we have to make a decision on I don't know, like Satoshi's coins or something. But it seems to me that there are also other like weaker thresholds before that. I mean, like as a researcher, for example, you probably have like a natural tendency to just say like always, oh, give us a few more months, we can make it a little bit better. But at some point we should have that we make a software and enable these new signatures, for example, and that should probably be way before the canary is broken. So how do you think about that? Like at what point should we make a decision and go with the best that we have?
Great question. So these two bubbles here, post-quantum output types and post-quantum signatures, they do not directly depend on canary in order for the schemes to be deployed. Specifically, pay-to-taproot hash and pay-to-taproot v2, they do need a canary or tripwire system in order to disable the key spend path of those output types. But there's no reason that we can't deploy them ahead of time. In fact, it's best if we do. We could deploy P2MR tomorrow if we had a sufficiently advanced implementation. Similarly, we could also deploy Shrinks if we had an advanced implementation and enough consensus. And these could be deployed well before Q Day, and they should, because the earlier we deploy these post-quantum wallet solutions, the sooner people can start moving their funds over to them. And because the post-quantum output types still support classical elliptic curve signatures, people can still spend Bitcoin the exact same way that they do today without any increase in like cost, witness size, or complexity. But having an accurate way to predict Q-Day, such as tripwire, is really useful for disabling classical legacy stuff that is vulnerable to quantum computers, such as the key spend path of pay-to-taproot v2. As for when we should make the decision for which output type and signature scheme to deploy, I think this is a thing we should start thinking about and coming to consensus on within the next year or two. And I think in terms of hash-based signatures, there's not really that much to be researched. Hash-based signatures have been around for decades. I don't foresee any major breakthroughs being made in the fundamental signature schemes themselves. Shrinks is really not anything new. We've only taken stuff that has been proposed before and amalgamated it together into a more palatable, unified signature scheme that's designed specifically for Bitcoin. But it doesn't do anything novel. And I don't think that we're going to have a hash-based signature scheme that does anything novel, because there's really not that much you can do using just hash functions. You need additional assumptions, like lattices, to get things that are a little more fancy. As for post-quantum output types, I think this debate is it's going to be a little bit more bike sheddy. because the debate between pay to Merkle root and pay to Taproot v2 is really like fundamentally at odds with one another in what they prioritize. Pay to Merkle root proponents prioritize security at the cost of all else. Pay to Taproot v2 proponents put more emphasis on efficiency and incentives. They suggest that people aren't going to migrate to an address format that is less efficient than what they have today with pay to Taproot. Pay to Merkle root proponents say everyone's going to use pay to Merkle root because who would want to put their coins on a quantum vulnerable address and then depend upon the incredibly reliable process of activating soft forks in 2026 for the security of their coins. And I think the most likely outcome that we're gonna end up with is deploying both, because they're not mutually exclusive. Actually, we can deploy both at the same time, and then people who want the extra efficiency can use pay to Taproot v2, and people who want the extra security can use pay to Merkle root. Of course, there's like some caveats there, because if most people end up using one or the other, it's kind of the same as if we had just deployed one, except we've partitioned the anonymity set of the UTXO set even more, and we've potentially introduced one address format that nobody is going to end up using. Pay to Merkle root is, in my view, the best long-term candidate because it doesn't include any classical elliptic curve cryptography. So it's a little cleaner to deal with after Q-Day, because after Q-Day, no one's going to use elliptic curve cryptography in their Taproot leaves anymore. So everyone's going to end up switching to pay to Merkle root in the long term. So my figuring is, if we're going to deploy an output type, why not deploy the one that we're going to use in the long term? But pay to Taproot v2 does have a pretty valid argument for its efficiency, especially if you couple it with CISA, because then you have this output type that's incredibly efficient to spend from, vastly more efficient than legacy pay to Taproot. And it also has the little extra benefit of having quantum secure fallback leaves embedded in every key by default. Although, it still depends on being able to accurately predict Q-Day. So whether that juice is worth the squeeze or not, I'm not sure. I haven't made up my mind on that.
What about classical break of ECC? How much does that factor into these discussions, or how do you think about that?
Great question. It's mostly the same. None of this is really quantum specific. It's just that quantum is the most salient threat to the elliptic curve discrete log problem today. You could make the same arguments that I made here, just replacing PQ with AI, post AI signatures, post AI output types. Any potential break of elliptic curves is going to be dealt with in more or less the same way. The key difference in quantum is that we can see it coming ahead of time, because people need to build these massive computers and they need to invest billions of dollars in industry and scientific research in order to make it possible. A simple cryptanalytic breakthrough of the ECDLP would be way more scary, because it would happen very suddenly and without any warning. And any work that we had been doing up until then would have to be suddenly very fast-tracked, deployed in a rush. And doing things in a rush is a great recipe for disaster. So in a way, the way that quantum computing is breaking Bitcoin is one of the best cases for us. In another way, it's the worst case, because quantum computers basically execute the worst class of attack that's possible, a key recovery attack. Given a public key, you can find a secret key. There's no knowledge asymmetries possible there unless you include like extraneous stuff like BIP32 or hash addresses. The classical elliptic curve discrete log problem break would probably be a weaker class of attack, such as a forgery attack, or a break in the zero knowledge property of the Schnorr signature scheme. And these would be a lot easier to recover from because the secret keys themselves are not compromised. It's the signature scheme that has an issue. However, if that happens, you wouldn't have any warning. Somebody would just publish a paper and suddenly Bitcoin would be insecure. So, it would be different in its in the way that we'd have to react to it a little bit. But the systems that we're designing in this graph, the projects that I've shown you here, are going to remain mostly the same. It's just that we'd have to rush things a little more if there was a cryptanalytic paper published that broke elliptic curve crypto.